Any questions or comments about the practice?
In general, sometimes I come out of practice and I'm very energetic and happy, and sometimes it's like after a war. What do I learn from this?
Sorry?
What do I learn from this?
So sometimes you come out of meditation, you're energetic and joyful, and other times you feel like you just had a war.
Yeah.
What can you learn from that? You can learn that our mind is very changeable as a beginner. Sometimes it's more calm and focused, other times it's more agitated. And often the times where we most progress is when things are challenging. Sometimes if our mind is quite calm, naturally, we get into practice and it's calm, and so there's not a lot of stuff happening, but then often what happens is we sort of sink into this nice, warm, fuzzy, dull state. Everything's very quiet, and you go, oh, this is really nice, really nice. And of course we just get stuck there. Whereas if a lot of stuff is coming, we say, oh, I'll have to try and deal with this. And it challenges us, and often that's when we really develop. So we shouldn't, that's what I was mentioning, I think, the other day about good and bad meditation. Often, I hear people say, oh, I had a really good meditation today, my mind was completely still. Or another person say, oh, my meditation day was awful, my mind was all over the place. Again, if we think like that, we're stuck in hope and fear. Hoping for pleasant things happening, fearing and worrying about unpleasant things happening. And then we'll just get caught up in attachment and aversion, and we sort of go round and round and round. So, again, if the mind is very active, then yes, it's difficult, but if we see it as a problem, then this comes and gets worse. So you go, okay, challenge today, let's see how I can meet this challenge today. And we do our best. And sometimes we get thrown around, okay, next time I'll do a little bit better. So just have this sort of attitude, and then don't get like in a fight, because if you try and fight with the mind, it's like throwing petrol on the fire. But we don't want to succumb either. We don't want to just allow the mind to take us away. But if we start to fight with the mind, it just gets worse. So, you know, just step back and watch as best we can without getting caught up. And of course, as a beginner, we'll get caught up sometimes, but that's our habit, okay. But every time we manage to step back a bit more, the amount of that stuff gets less, and also our ability to step back and not get caught up slowly improves over time. And so that's actually when we progress a lot. So a lot of variability. You know, and sometimes people have this expectation that their practice sort of should go like this. You know, that, you know, my practice this week, it's got to be at least the same as last week, probably a little bit better. And then, of course, it's not, and then we get frustrated. And so I don't know anyone whose practice goes like this. I mean, the short term is a lot of like this, and that's normal. And so, again, when it's difficult is often the time when we progress the most. So if it's difficult, then do the best, and then we will get better, slowly. Down the back here.
I find it very better for me to do my meditation focused on sounds.
Sounds, sure.
Something calm, and not to get attached to any sound, to be aware of any sound that comes, birds, sound signs, and moving, car, whatever. Is it the same quality as watching my breath or
No.
my mind? Or?
Yeah. So the question is, I like observing sound. Is that same quality as the breath? Sometimes in the meditation texts, they offer different options, and the most common one or the standard one is the breath. And then sometimes the meditation text says, "Oh, you find the breath very impossible? Okay, find yourself a stick or a pebble, put it down, and look at it." Or use a visual object. And I think the same we can say for use a repetitive sound, listen to sounds, chanting a mantra. So all of these, of course, can be objects to help us to get into the practice. But probably what you're going to find is that once we get into the practice and start progressing a bit, you'll probably find listening to a sound or observing a visual object is a bit limited in how far we can get. So you'll probably find at some point that we'll sort of get a bit stuck and it'll be harder to progress further. So at that point, then it's the texts who talk about visual object, they say, okay, once you sort of get into the practice doing that, now switch to an image, a mental image of that visual object, something more subtle. So yeah, we can use the sound as a starting point to get into the practice, but I think at some point we'll need to move beyond that if we really want to progress further.
What do you mean by progress? What do you mean by stuck or progress? Stuck how?
Stuck.
Yeah.
Stuck because the nature of the object is quite coarse, meaning...
But it's not one object, just
yeah, right. But because it's
changing all the time. It's not a mantra that
correct, but it's a sense object.
Yes.
So a sense object in terms of sounds and visual objects are quite, coarse, and due to their nature of them, we won't be able to get too far. I mean, of course, we can get into the practice quite well, and our attention can improve quite a lot. Yes, so it's not like not much is going to happen. We could improve quite a lot in our attention, but if we're really talking about moving along these stages here, then at some point we're going to need to shift from that to a more subtle object, a mental object.
And also, if I add at the same time, like watching the breath or the nostrils, so then it's two objects. So
yeah, that's probably getting a little bit too... So if you're doing that, I just stick with the sound.
When you say that you get stuck, how do you recognize that you're stuck?
Because your attention is not improving, your stability and clarity is not improving over time.
Over how much time? A few months?
I mean, it really depends a lot also on how much effort you put into the practice and how your lifestyle is supporting this practice. Because if we're only doing a little bit each day, then of course it would be unrealistic to think that we could get all the way to Shamatha with a little bit of meditation each day. I mean, it'd be like the idea that if we practice piano for 30 minutes every day, that we're going to be a concert pianist. I mean, this would be a little bit unrealistic, I think. You know, if we practice 30 minutes a day, we might be able to be okay and play some songs, but to be like a concert pianist, you need a little bit more effort than that. So if we're putting that more effort and the environment supports, then you'll find after some time, and it's not like a fixed amount of time. It will depend on individuals, because some individuals progress faster and some not. So, you know, for some people, maybe after some weeks they notice that it's stuck, and for others, maybe after many months they're sort of stuck a bit. So it's not, there's no sort of fixed amount of time. Depends on many factors, including the person's capacity.
So except time, are there other clues that you're stuck?
Again, you just notice that the quality of your attention is not progressing, meaning that in terms of stability and clarity, these two qualities are not improving. And the more we get into the practice, the more, now of course it's even difficult for us to see how, if they're really changing much. But as we get more into the practice, our ability to notice the changes will get more and more fine. So we'll be able to, as we start to really get into the practice, we'll be able to notice small changes more than we would now.
When I'm watching my mind, I have two challenges.
The thoughts of practice, you mean? The observe, yeah.
Observing thoughts. One of the things that makes it more hard to let go of thoughts is that when I do let go of them, it's more subtle to know like where I don't understand really where to focus my attention. So then I end up like staying with the thoughts or clinging to it in order not to be lost. You know
Sure.
what I mean?
Yeah, so the question is, when I'm observing the thought and it goes, I get sort of a bit lost on where to focus. So then I hold on to the thought.
Yeah.
Again, the thought, of course, is appearing in the mind, or we call it the space of the mind. So again, the space of the mind is not really a thing. It's the space within which everything appears. So if we're looking for a thing, then of course we're not going to see that thing. So that's why I think sometimes this resting in awareness practice can be very helpful, because we can get more familiar with the space of the mind, the awareness through that. And then when we start observing, then we've got that referent of the space of the mind. So that's one thing we can do.
Do you have another thing we can do?
Sorry?
Is there another thing we can do?
I think as well that if we're just patient, and as our stability and clarity improve, this awareness or space of the mind will become more and more clear. And it's only something that we can really see through experience. So just be patient, basically.
To realize I was kidnapped, after I was kidnapped, it's easy.
Yeah.
I see that what's happening is I'm aware of the fact that I'm not kidnapped, but still, to negate something doesn't mean that you say something positive. What do I mean? I am concentrated in the breathing. You know, breathing like the voice, like the waves.
Yeah.
I realize that between the waves,
Yeah.
I know I am not kidnapped. I know I'm here, I'm concentrating.
Sure.
But still, even though I'm concentrated, I am not kidnapped, I hear downstairs murmuring of inner conversation.
Yeah.
And I know I am not kidnapped. It
Yeah.
would be easier
Yeah.
if I know if it was
Yeah.
kidnapped.
Yeah.
So I'm asking question of patience, or am I doing something
No,
wrong?
no. In fact, I briefly touched on that yesterday evening when we were looking at these middling stages, and I'll go over it again this evening. You know, what we saw in this diagram was over the first 3 stages, particularly first 2 stages, we're kidnapped all the time. By stage 3, when we're kidnapped, quickly back.
No problem.
Stage 4, we're never kidnapped again. From stage 4 onwards, never kidnapped. But as you said, even at stage 4, we can have even more than what you've suggested. You're saying that you're mainly on the breath and there's some murmurings.
Yes.
Even at stage 4, the murmurings can be the main thing, and the what you call murmurings now, it might be you're focusing a little bit on the breath. So you're mainly stuck, but you're not completely kidnapped because a little bit you're still on the breath. So there's a variation there from completely kidnapped to not kidnapped, but only a little bit focusing on the breath, and then more on the breath and less murmurings, more on the breath, less murmurings, more breath, less murmurings, and eventually no murmurings. So it'll take and that's what's happening. In fact, this is exactly what is happening from stage 4 up to about stage 8. Exactly this is that by simply improving our mindfulness and introspection, by paying closer and closer attention to the breath, we have less and less murmurings. They say, because what's actually happening when we think we're doing 2 things at once, focusing on the breath and there's some thoughts there. But actually what's happening is this.
I'm not aware if it's...
No, we can't be, because it's so quick. I mean, this backwards and forwards could happen many times a second. So what I'm saying is that... patience, but just to pay closer, stay relaxed, pay closer and closer attention, and because what's happening is this backwards and forwards, and at the start you may be on the murmurings, and we're talking 1 second here, for a fair amount of time, back to the breath for a short time, back to the murmurings longer, back to the breath short, murmurings long, short breath, all of that in 1 second. So it seems like we're doing both. And because of that, it seems like mainly you're focusing on the thought, a little bit on the breath. But if you pay closer and closer attention to the breath, you'll find that off to the murmurings for a short time, back to the breath longer, the murmuring shorter, breath longer, and eventually you'll not go to the murmurings and then quiet. Then there's nothing there. And that doesn't really happen. I mean, so that's improving the quality. When there's no murmuring at all, we're way up here at stage 8. Stage 8. Stage 7, which we're going to look at, is if there's a little bit there, we just gone. Stage 8, the mind is gone quiet.
Can I ask something? Maybe it will prove that I didn't understand. Maybe
Sure.
It's a different question, I don't know.
Sure.
What I'm asking is, I am concentrated in the breathing,
Mm-hmm.
in a way.
Sure.
Okay. Sometimes there is not even murmuring. Okay.
Sure.
What do I see there in the downstairs, the lowest point of the wave?
You mean in between the in and out breath?
Yes. Well, I'm expecting to see zero, to be quiet, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm
Of course, if, for example, if your breath, you mean you're focusing here or here,
yeah.
then at the bottom and at the top,
Yeah.
there's still sensations here.
This is not a problem.
So you'll still notice that. So it's not like there'll be blank. You'll notice the sensations here that are here even when there's no air moving over that point. And that's a sign that the quality is improving. Is that now, because our clarity is not so good, in that point, it seems like it's quiet, nothing. And it's only when we start to breathe in or start to breathe out, then there's sensations, yeah?
Okay.
But in between, at the end of the in-breath, before the out-breath starts, I mean, there's sensations here happening all the time.
Yeah.
But because our clarity is not very good, we don't notice it. So when we get to that gap between in and out breath, here there seems to be nothing. But if we pay closer and closer attention without tensing, what we're going to notice is when the breath finishes, the in-breath finishes, we're going to notice some very subtle sensations on the skin here. And then when the breath starts going out, we'll notice, in addition, we'll notice the air, the movement of the air on that point.
So what you're telling me again, be patient?
Patience, yes, patience. No. Down the back and then over here.
I want your advice on something. In my meditation group.
In your meditation group? Yeah.
We do meditations about from half an hour to an hour.
For half an hour to an hour?
Yes. Depends on the level. We have one low level group and one high level group.
Sure.
And at home, I can only manage like sessions of 10 minutes, break 10 minutes, break 10 minutes.
Sure.
So we always say quality over quantity, but I also feel very comfortable doing like the 1 hour meditation, but it's usually with a group and with more people. So how is it, if there's no correlation between what I'm doing at home and what I'm doing in the group, how can I make it more, or is it okay to do it like that?
When you say you meditate half an hour to an hour, you would do one meditation for 60 minutes non-stop? What type of meditation?
We do Shamatha.
Yeah. I think that if we're going to do 60 minutes in one session, I mean, to really make best use of that time, we'd want to have already progressed quite well. I mean, sort of, 60 minutes, effectively, we're really talking about stage 4.
Yeah.
So we're talking about being able to focus on the object for 60 minutes without once getting distracted. I mean, of course, we'll have the murmurings and other things going on, but stage 4 means we would not fully forget the object at all. There'll be a lot of background noise and things, but we'll be more or less on the object the whole time. So if we're finding that that's nowhere near the case for the group, as a group, then if you want to meditate, and it's okay to have a 1 hour session, but then I would do like here, is have a little bell after like 15 or 20 minutes, give them a couple of minutes break, another 20 minutes, 2 minutes break, another 20 minutes, like that, rather than just one full session.
I'm not the one who's...
Oh, you're part of the group? Yeah. But certainly that's what I would do. And of course, probably in the group, the level of people is probably probably not everyone is at the same level. So it's actually quite difficult then to, you have to sort of try and find the middle way that satisfies most people. That some people would probably like to meditate longer, some less. So the idea is to...
45 minutes is the average. 45 minutes is the average.
The average what?
Of the time of the duration.
Of the meditation. But again, I think it would be helpful to find out from the people in the group where people more or less are at. Because if most people can't really sustain 45 minutes well, I think it's a bit counterproductive to go for 45 minutes. So
people come and go, and sometimes some people are comfortable with it, and sometimes people drop to the lower groups.
But I think what I would do would be sort of err on the side of not safety, but lesser. Meaning, if you're doing 45 minutes, you can have 45 minutes, and you can break it into maybe 3:15, and after 15 minutes, a little bell. And those of you that don't need a break, they just keep meditating. And the ones that do, when they hear the bell, they sort of rest for a minute or two, and then they start again. So then you're satisfying the whole spectrum of people.
My question was how at home how do I at home prolong the duration of the meditation, like maybe 20 minutes?
How much or how long to meditate for you?
To prolong the meditation duration.
So So is the question how long you should meditate, or how to
How
How
to
to
prolong
extend
it
it, how to make
How
it
to
longer.
prolong it.
how to make it longer?
in a way that would be beneficial, not just daydreaming.
Again,
whatever.
Again, I would then, if you want to meditate longer, but you can't sustain it, break it into small sections with a little break in between.
This is what I do now.
It's fine. And to know when to extend the amount of time you meditate, one measure is if your normal experience is at the